From the moment my son, Ethan, was born, I swore I would never be the kind of father my own dad had been to me. I wanted to be different. I wanted Ethan to look at me with pride, to feel safe in my presence, to believe in me the way I never believed in my own father. And for a long time, I thought I was doing everything right. Ethan grew up in a modest little house on the edge of a small American town, where neighbors waved from porches and kids rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I worked long hours at the auto shop while his mom, Rachel, handled most of the day-to-day at home. Still, no matter how tired I was, when I walked through that door and saw my little boy's face light up, it made every ache worth it. "Daddy," he used to shout, running at me with open arms. He'd tug at my work-stained shirt and say, "When I grow up, I'm gonna be just like you." Those words sank deeper than he could ever know. They weren't just cute kid talk. They were a promise, a lifeline for me. I thought if my son saw me as a hero, maybe I could finally forgive myself for all the ways I'd failed in life before him. Ethan was bright, curious, and sensitive. He loved to follow me around in the garage, pretending his little plastic tools were fixing cars alongside me. Sometimes, I'd set aside a broken radio or an old lawnmower just so he could help. He'd stand there, all proud, telling his mom, "I fixed it with Daddy." At school events, he'd brag about me. Teachers would pull me aside with smiles and say, "Ethan tells everyone his dad can fix anything." And the truth was, I felt invincible in those moments. I wasn't just his father. I was his superhero. But the weight of being someone's hero is heavier than most people realize. Heroes don't get to mess up. Heroes don't get second chances. Heroes don't stumble. And while I carried that role with pride, life has a way of reminding you just how fragile that image really is. When Ethan was about 10, I started noticing the shift. His questions grew harder, his eyes sharper. He didn't just want to play mechanic anymore. He wanted real answers about the world, about money, about why I wasn't home as much, about why his mom, and I sometimes whispered, argued behind closed doors. "Dad, why do you work so much if we still don't have enough money for vacations like the other kids?" he asked me one night, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. I froze, holding a stack of bills in my hands I thought he hadn't noticed. I mumbled something about responsibilities, about how not everyone lives the same way. But deep down, I knew he was beginning to see through the cracks in the armor. Still, he'd end every talk with something that stitched me back together. "It's okay, Dad. You're still my hero." I clung to those words. I didn't know how much I needed them until the day I lost them forever. Because what Ethan didn't know, what no one knew, was that I was carrying a secret mistake. One decision, born out of desperation, that would unravel everything. And when the truth finally came out, my son's eyes no longer saw a hero. They saw a man who had lied, who had failed, who had betrayed the very foundation of trust he had built his childhood on. But before I tell you about the night it all fell apart, I need you to understand who we were and why that single mistake hit us so hard. You see, in Ethan's world, I was untouchable. I was the man who could fix anything, who could hold back monsters, who would never break. And the cruel irony was, I believed it too. Until the day I couldn't fix what I had broken. That's the thing about being someone's hero. The higher they put you on a pedestal, the harder the fall when you come crashing down. And for me, the fall wasn't just hard. It was catastrophic. The mistake didn't happen overnight. Looking back, it was more like a series of small cracks that finally split wide open, no matter how hard I tried to tape them shut. It started with money. Doesn't it always? Rachel and I had been struggling for years. Bills piled up faster than my overtime paychecks could cover. Ethan was getting older, and so were his needs: school trips, soccer cleats, tutoring programs that all the other kids seemed to be in. He never asked for much, but I could see the way he looked at his friends when they bragged about vacations to Disney World or the latest gaming consoles. "Dad, can we ever go somewhere like that? Just once?" he asked me one night. His voice wasn't whiny, it was hopeful. And that hope gutted me. I told him, "Someday, buddy. Someday, when things get better." But the truth was, someday wasn't coming. Not with the way things were going. So when the opportunity presented itself, a shortcut, a way to get ahead, I told myself it wasn't really wrong. Just bending the rules. Just this once. The auto shop where I worked wasn't exactly squeaky clean. A lot of shady deals went on after hours, selling used parts as new, charging customers for work we never actually did. I had always turned a blind eye, convincing myself it wasn't my problem. But one Friday, my boss pulled me aside and said, "Collins, you've been loyal. You want a little extra cash for your family? Easy job. Nobody gets hurt." He wanted me to misplace a shipment of car parts, stuff worth more than I made in a year. I didn't have to sell it, didn't have to move it, just make sure it got rerouted. He'd handle the rest. In exchange, he promised me more money than I'd ever seen at once. Enough to cover Ethan's tuition, enough to take my family on that vacation, enough to finally stop feeling like I was failing. I knew it was wrong. Every part of me screamed that I was stepping onto dangerous ground. But then I thought about Ethan. About the way his eyes lit up when I promised him someday. About the way he called me his hero. I told myself heroes did what they had to for their families, even if it meant making a deal with the devil. So I did it. I signed the paperwork, I looked the other way, and the shipment disappeared. And for a while, it felt like I had beaten the system. The extra money slipped into our account. Rachel asked where it came from, and I lied, saying it was a bonus for all my extra hours. Ethan grinned ear to ear when we bought him the bike he'd been dreaming about, and I told myself it was worth it. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface. One evening, months later, two men showed up at the house. They weren't the kind of guys who smiled when you opened the door. They asked for me by name, their tone sharp, their eyes cold. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway while Ethan clung to her side, his little hand gripping her shirt. I told them I didn't know what they were talking about, that they must have the wrong guy. But they left me with a warning. "You owe us, Collins. And debts don't disappear." I tried to shield my family from it, to act like it was nothing. But Ethan wasn't a little boy anymore. He was 12, old enough to notice the fear in my voice, the way I double-checked the locks at night. "Dad," he asked me one evening, "what's going on? Who are those guys?" I wanted to tell him the truth. God, I wanted to. But heroes don't admit weakness. Heroes don't confess that they've put their family in danger. So I lied again. "Just some guys from work. Don't worry about it." But Ethan didn't stop worrying. He started asking more questions, watching me with suspicion instead of admiration. I could feel the shift happening, even before the final blow landed. The blow came when one of those men cornered Ethan after school. My son. My boy who thought I could protect him from anything. They didn't hurt him, thank God. But they leaned down, their voices dripping with threat, and said, "Tell your dad he better pay up, or next time we won't be so nice." When Ethan came home, pale and shaking, I felt my world collapse. "Why are they after you, Dad?" His voice cracked, his eyes full of betrayal. "What did you do?" And in that moment, I couldn't lie anymore. The dam broke. I confessed everything, the missing shipment, the money, the deal I thought I could get away with. I thought maybe he'd understand that I did it for him, for us. But instead, his face twisted in a way I had never seen before. "You're supposed to be my hero," he whispered, his voice trembling with anger. "You're not supposed to be a criminal." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Rachel stared at me like I was a stranger. Ethan stormed off to his room, and I sat there in the wreckage of the lie I had built, realizing my pedestal had crumbled. I thought I had made one mistake. Just one. But the truth was that one mistake had shattered the image my son held of me. And no matter what I did, I couldn't glue it back together. Because once a hero falls, there's no climbing back up. Not in the eyes of a child who trusted you with everything. After the night I confessed, nothing in our house felt the same. Ethan stopped looking at me the way he used to. There were no more hugs when I came home from work. No more, "You're my hero, Dad." Instead, there was silence. A cold, heavy silence that weighed more than any shouting ever could. Rachel tried to hold the pieces together, but even she couldn't hide the disappointment in her eyes. She never yelled, never threw me out, but sometimes the quiet disapproval was worse. It was like she was living with a stranger, a man she couldn't quite trust anymore. And Ethan, my boy, kept slipping further away from me with every passing day. He stopped coming into the garage to watch me work. His little stool, the one he always dragged over to help me fix things, just sat there collecting dust. The sound of his laughter, once the soundtrack of my evenings, disappeared into the closed door of his bedroom. At dinner, he barely spoke. When I asked about school, he gave one-word answers. When I told him I loved him, he nodded but never said it back. It was like I had lost him. Not physically, he was still there, under the same roof, but emotionally, he was gone. One night, I stood outside his room, listening to the faint sound of music playing behind his door. I raised my hand to knock, but froze. What if he told me to go away? What if he didn't even open the door? My own son. And I was afraid of him rejecting me. I knocked anyway. Ethan, can we talk? The music stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe he would let me in. But then his voice came, sharp and cold. There's nothing to talk about. I leaned my forehead against the door, my throat tightening. I know I messed up. But I did it for you. For us. Silence. Then, finally, his words came through the wood like daggers. I didn't ask you to do that. I just wanted my dad. Not whatever you are now. I staggered back, my chest aching. Not whatever you are now. I had become a villain in my own son's story. The weeks turned into months. Ethan grew more distant, more secretive. He stopped telling me about his friends, his classes, his dreams. I learned more about his life from overhearing conversations with Rachel than I did from him. And the worst part? I couldn't blame him. I had shattered his trust, and once that glass breaks, no amount of glue can make it whole again. One afternoon, Rachel pulled me aside in the kitchen. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were firm. You need to give him space, Mark. He'll come around when he's ready. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that time could heal this wound. But the look in Ethan's eyes every time he glanced at me told a different story. It wasn't just anger. It was disappointment. And disappointment lingers far longer than anger ever does. Then came the school awards ceremony. Ethan had won an award for academic excellence, something he had worked tirelessly for. Rachel and I sat in the crowded auditorium, clapping as his name was called. He walked across the stage, taller now, his shoulders squared, his face set in determination. When he glanced at the audience, his eyes found Rachel immediately. He smiled at her. But when his gaze flicked past me, his expression hardened. No smile. No acknowledgement. It was like I wasn't even there. That moment broke me in a way I can't explain. Because heroes don't just fall, they get erased. I tried to make it up to him. I offered to take him to a baseball game, just the two of us, like we used to. He shrugged and said he was busy. I left notes on his desk, small reminders that I loved him, that I was proud of him. I found them crumpled in the trash later. I even tried to confess more, to show him that I was human, that I was flawed but still his father. One night, I told him about my own dad, how he had walked out on me when I was young, how I had sworn never to become like him. I thought if I could just be your hero, I could undo everything he did to me, I admitted, my voice shaking. Ethan's eyes flickered with something, pity maybe, but then he shook his head. You don't get it, Dad. You can't erase your mistakes by saying you did them for me. You were supposed to be the one person I could count on, and you weren't. That night, I cried in the garage, alone, surrounded by the broken things I used to know how to fix. Cars, engines, radios, those I could handle. But not this. Not the fracture between me and my son. And then came the day I'll never forget. Rachel was at work, and I was fixing the sink when I heard Ethan in the living room with his friends. His voice was louder than usual, full of teenage bravado. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the words hit me like a punch to the gut. My dad? Don't even start. He's the reason I hate my family. He ruined everything. Laughter followed, his friends egging him on. I sank to the floor, the wrench slipping from my hand. My own son, my boy who once said I was his hero, was telling the world I was the reason he hated his family. And in that moment, I realized something I had been denying for too long. I hadn't just made a mistake. I'd lost him. Completely. The words echoed in my head long after Ethan's friends had gone home. He's the reason I hate my family. I must have replayed them 100 times, like a cruel record stuck on repeat. No matter how much I told myself he didn't mean it, that maybe it was just a teenage outburst meant to impress his friends, I couldn't shake the sting. That night, Rachel noticed the way I sat at the dinner table, staring at my plate without eating. She placed her hand on mine and whispered, "What happened?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to pour out the pain cloying inside me. But how could I? How could I admit that our son, the boy we had raised, the boy who once adored me, now despised me so much he was saying it out loud to others? Instead, I shook my head. Just tired. But the truth was, I wasn't just tired. I was breaking. And Ethan seemed to sense it. The more I tried to hold on, the more he pushed away. He stayed out later with his friends. He avoided family dinners. He rolled his eyes at me when I tried to give advice. Every small gesture became a battlefield, every word a potential spark. One Saturday morning, I found him in the garage rummaging through my tools. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing," he muttered without looking at me. I stepped closer. "If you need something, I can help." He turned on me then, his voice sharp as glass. "I don't need your help. I don't need you." The words landed like a fist to my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Ethan." I started, my voice trembling. He dropped the wrench he'd been holding, the clang echoing through the garage. "You were supposed to be different. You always said you'd never let me down. And you did. You let all of us down. So stop pretending you're some kind of good dad." He stormed past me, leaving me standing there surrounded by the wreckage of what used to be our bond. I wanted to chase after him. I wanted to grab him, hold him, beg him to remember who I was before all of this. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The tension in our house grew unbearable. Rachel and I argued more than ever, always in hushed tones so Ethan wouldn't hear, though I'm sure he did anyway. "You have to fix this," she pleaded one night. "You can't just let it fester. He's your son, Mark." "I've tried," I snapped, my voice breaking. "Every day, I try. And every day, he looks at me like I'm nothing. What am I supposed to do?" She didn't have an answer. Neither did I. Then came the breaking point. It was late one evening when Ethan didn't come home on time. Rachel paced the living room, her face pale with worry. I tried calling his phone, no answer. I drove around town, checking the park, the diner, anywhere he might be. Nothing. Finally, around midnight, he stumbled through the front door, reeking of alcohol. Rachel gasped. "Ethan, where have you been?" He shrugged, his words slurred. "Out." I stepped forward, anger and fear colliding in my chest. "You're 15, Ethan. You can't just disappear all night and come home drunk." He glared at me, swaying slightly. "Why do you care? You're the reason everything sucks anyway." Rachel tried to intervene, but I couldn't hold back anymore. "Do you have any idea what could have happened to you?" I shouted. "Do you know how scared we were?" Ethan sneered. "Scared? Please. The only thing you care about is yourself. You're a liar, a criminal, and you ruined this family. You don't get to act like you care now." The words hit me harder than any punch ever could. Something inside me snapped. "I made one mistake, Ethan. One. And I did it for you, for this family. I have spent every day of my life trying to give you more than I ever had. But nothing is ever enough, is it? Not for you." His face hardened, his eyes cold. "I didn't need money or vacations. I just needed a dad I could respect. And you couldn't even give me that." The room went silent. Rachel covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And me? I stood there, shaking, realizing I had just lost the last shred of connection I had with my son. Ethan stormed upstairs, slamming his door so hard the walls rattled. I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling, my chest heaving. Rachel sat beside me but didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence said it all. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of Ethan's muffled music through the walls, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Once, I had been his hero. Now, I was the villain in his story. And no matter what I did, I couldn't change that. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly see, was that the breaking point wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something even harder. The fight to somehow put the pieces back together. The house was quieter than ever after that night. Rachel barely spoke to me unless it was about bills or groceries, and Ethan, well, he made sure our paths rarely crossed. He left early, stayed late, and when we were in the same room, it felt like I was invisible. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Is this it? Is this how it ends between me and my son? I thought back to the early years, the way he'd once looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes, calling me his hero. I thought about how much I had sworn to be different from my own father, to never abandon my child emotionally the way I had been abandoned. And now, here I was, living out the very nightmare I had sworn to escape. But I refused to let that be the final chapter of our story. One evening, Rachel and I sat in the kitchen long after Ethan had gone upstairs. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound between us until she finally spoke. "Mark," she whispered, "you can't keep waiting for him to come to you. You're the adult. You're his father. If you want him back, you have to fight for him." Her words sank into me like anchors. Fight for him. So I started small. Instead of avoiding him, I made myself present. I showed up to every soccer game, even when he didn't acknowledge me in the stands. I left encouraging notes in his backpack, even if I found them crumpled later. I stopped trying to buy his forgiveness with gifts and instead offered what he had asked for all along: my time, my honesty, and my presence. At first, it didn't make a difference. He brushed me off, rolled his eyes, and walked away. But I kept showing up anyway. The turning point came one rainy Saturday afternoon. Ethan had planned to go out with friends, but the storm canceled everything. He was stuck at home, sulking in the living room. I saw my chance. "Hey," I said softly, standing in the doorway. "Want to help me fix the old radio in the garage? It won't take long." He didn't even look at me. "No." I nodded, pretending not to be crushed. "That's fine. I'll be in the garage if you change your mind." I didn't expect him to follow. But 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Ethan appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression guarded. "What's wrong with it?" he asked flatly. I swallowed my surprise and handed him a screwdriver. "Why don't you see for yourself?" We worked in silence at first. The rain tapped against the roof, the smell of motor oil and dust filling the air. Ethan fiddled with the screws, his hands steady, his face focused. For a moment, it felt like old times, like the little boy who used to stand beside me, eager to learn. When the radio finally crackled to life, his eyes flickered with the smallest spark of pride. He tried to hide it, but I saw it. And in that spark, I found hope. "Good job," I said quietly. "You've got a real talent for this." He shrugged, but I noticed the corner of his mouth twitch upward before he turned away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, those small moments began to grow. He'd linger a little longer in the garage. He'd let me drive him to practice, even if the car ride was filled with silence. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him laugh at something on his phone and remember the sound of the little boy I used to know. Then came the night that changed everything. Ethan had a big game, one that determined whether his team would go to the state finals. The stands were packed, the air electric. I sat nervously beside Rachel, clutching the edge of my seat. With seconds left on the clock, Ethan scored the winning goal. The crowd erupted, his teammates swarmed him, and I leapt to my feet, cheering louder than anyone. And then it happened. In the middle of the chaos, Ethan's eyes found mine. For the first time in years, he didn't look away. He didn't glare or harden his face. Instead, he gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't much, but it was everything. After the game, as we walked to the car, Ethan fell into step beside me. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Thanks for coming." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Wouldn't miss it for the world. We didn't say much else that night, but the wall between us had cracked, and for the first time, I could see a path forward. It wasn't easy. It didn't happen overnight. But slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. I told him the truth about everything, about my mistakes, my regrets, my fears. I didn't hide behind excuses anymore. And in return, he began to share pieces of himself again. Not everything. Not right away. But enough to show me that he was willing to try. One evening, months later, as we were fixing another old engine together, Ethan set down his wrench and looked at me. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think you were perfect." I froze, unsure of how to respond. "But you're not," he continued, his eyes steady on mine. "And maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need a perfect dad. I just need one who doesn't give up." My throat tightened, tears stinging my eyes. "I'll never give up on you, Ethan. Not ever." He gave me a small smile, the first real one in years. And in that moment, I knew we weren't back to where we once were. Maybe we never would be. But we were building something new. Something real. Because heroes aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who stand back up, no matter how many times they're knocked down. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could be that kind of hero again. Not the perfect one Ethan once imagined, but the real one he needed all along.